Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show for episode 138. Wood bending. It's an interesting topic. Certainly, it's something I've discussed before. In essence, to bend wood, you have to compress one side of the board, the inside curve or the concave side of the curve, and stretch the convex or outside of the curve. What if that wasn't true? Enter compressed wood. We've talked about bending wood, and we've talked about modulus of elasticity and modulus of rupture and how we look at those to determine if a wood is good for bending. But how about we throw all of that out the window and we talk about cold bending compressed hardwoods? And today, I have the president of Pure Timber LLC, the guy who basically is the single driving force behind wood compression and cold bending technology. Welcome to the show, Christo.
Thank you.
So I guess we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. What exactly is compressed hardwood?
So compressed hardwood has been engineered to make it flexible for bending.
Right.
And wood will bend, of course, but wood will not stretch very much before it breaks.
Right.
So to bend
the outside of the curve versus the inside of the curve, in other words.
Yes. So to bend wood, you need to compress the inside of the curve. Steam benders accomplish that with steel backing straps. So backing straps with an end stop keeps the outside of the curve at its length, its natural length, and pushes compression towards the inside. Wood is perfectly fine with that up to a point. It takes a fair bit of energy to do that, and you have to do it with each and every piece that you are steam bending. So compressed wood is taking the wood and putting that compression into the wood before it's bent. So it is a sort of a pre-compression where the wood is now engineered with stretch in it. So we build in the stretch. Picture it like a straight drinking straw that just a plastic drinking straw that we turn into a hospital drinking straw. So we've got something that is very long and straight and stiff-walled, and then we turn it into something that's sort of full of a bellows, little micro bellows inside. Right. The cell walls are doing two things. They're sliding through each other, and then they're also forming this micro bellows inside. That is the secret to why this works, because we are engineering that potential future stretch into the wood.
Right.
So we do this under very precise conditions that we can get into, but once we have done that, we can take the plank in the future and saw off whatever size we want from that plank and then bend it cold and not worry about stretch. So the wood stretches back out as we bend it. So this becomes the opposite of steam bending, where steam bending is compression to the inside, and then we take our pre-compressed wood and bend it, and it's stretching to the outside, which is something wood couldn't normally otherwise do. But it is perfectly happy to stretch back to where it used to be.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, while it is cold bended, you're still utilizing a fair bit of moisture. Like once the moisture is gone, just like with steam bending, it's set. It's set and it's formed whatever you've bent it to. So there is still a bit of moisture, correct?
Yes, and that's correct. Moisture is very critical to all forms of wood bending. And we can get into a long discussion on moisture content if you like. But I will try and give you a very short description here. Wood, as you know, has both free water and bound water. The free water is what's in the xylem and phloem, and the bound water is inside the cells. It's intercellular. When you take fresh sawn green lumber and start to dry it, the free water is what comes off first. It's the easiest for the plank to release. And eventually you get to the point where free water is mostly gone, and now the bound water has to come out. Free water drying can be done, is generally done slowly for things like oaks so that you don't check the oaks because it can come out so fast. And it comes out so easily that it can damage the wood. Once the free water is out, though, it's pretty hard to damage the wood. Your bound water, you can now put it in a kiln, dry out the rest of that bound water. So in wood compression, we catch it in between those two stages. Free water's gone, bound water's still in there. And I usually say that wood in a log is around 40% moisture content, and that we need it about half dry to begin working with it, and half dry is so 20%.
Right.
My sweet spot's about 15 to 25, but let's just say 20%. And above 20%, the wood is releasing its free water. Below 20%, it has to release its bound water. But once you get down to 6 or 7% that fine furniture builders want, or floors, or whatever we're doing for interior woodwork, so much of the bound water has been removed that it's just equilibrated with the environment. There's no more to come out.
Right.
And at that point, the wood is stable and isn't going to move, is going to be like that forever. So we take our 20% moisture content, compress it, store it, bend it, and then we finish the drying to fix the shape.
Okay. So this, and I've seen, electron micrographs of compressed wood, and you look at the cell walls, and it almost looks crenellated or like a corrugated surface. That bellows shape you
Yes.
described. I was thinking accordion fold, but bellows is a much better way of putting that. And that flexi straw. Everybody's used a flexi straw, right? Everybody knows exactly what that is and how that bends. That's a great analogy for that. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is the cell walls sliding past one another. I'm not quite following you. If we're talking longitudinal fibers here, basically this allows, obviously you've got a long strand, and that strand is made up of several different fibers. And what you're saying is those fibers, or excuse me, those molecules can essentially pass one another. And that's how that bellow shape is created. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, the cell wall is going to adjust itself for the compression. We are putting in about a 20% compression. So just to give you a visual on what that means, we start with 10-foot planks of wood, and we compress them to 8-foot planks of wood. So
Okay.
consider that the wood is, say, a 2x6 of white oak, 10 feet long, at 20% moisture content. We're turning that into a 2x6 of white oak that's only 8 feet long. So the cell walls have to do something and go somewhere.
Right.
And
So
it's
once they
kind of,
take up the space, then they have to kind of pass past each other in order to continue to shrink in length, in other words.
I think all kinds of things happen in there, but I use that as an example to help visualize what's happening at this kind of microscopic level that we can't see. And the electron micrographs do show that we get some cell wall sliding and folding.
Right.
So
Interesting.
it's more of a way to think about what could be happening inside than a scientific explanation
Sure.
of what it's really
Sure.
doing. But it is essentially the same, though, as what the steam bender is doing. If they can put the maximum amount of pressure into their curve, they will also get a 20% compression on the inside of the bend. That is a lot of bend, though. And
Yeah.
most steam benders aren't getting anywhere near that. Let me give you another visual on what this 10-foot to 8-foot means. On the edges of our planks, now this is, say, the 2x6 white oak, 10 feet long, we put a mark every 10 inches from one end to the other. And it's a ballpoint pen mark that survives the steaming and the compression and storage. So when that plank comes out of the press, those 10-inch lines are 8 inches apart.
Okay.
And that's a pretty dramatic thing to think about. And the challenge in wood compression is to have it 8 inches all the way from one end of the plank and not have 9.5 at one end and 7.5 at the other, which happens too. It's
Right.
difficult to control this process, and I've been doing it for 20 years, so I'm pretty good at controlling it. But once in a while, I get surprised, and I'll get over compression on one end and other compression on another. And there's a lot of reasons why that can happen. There's just a lot of variabilities in this process. It's a little bit more art than science when we get to
Yeah.
that point. But it definitely is a science. So we were talking about that 10 inches and 8 inches. So now it's hard to picture taking a 10-foot plank of wood that's become 8 and then bending it back to be a 10, because what kind of bend would you have to do with it? And I can give you an example, though. You know about what the size of a snare drum shell is, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they've got about a 14-inch outer diameter, 12-inch inner diameter, something like that. Take that plank and coil it twice to be two snare drums, but now it's coiled. That's kind of how far we can go in
Wow.
bending that 2x6 of white oak. So that's a little bit hard to picture, though, because who's going to do that? I have, but who else?
Yeah, you have, of course. Why not? Yeah.
So let's look at the 10-inch part and the 8-inch. And so if we're just looking at those lines and we go and bend it like crazy as much as we can, eventually we'll see the 8-inch line go back to 10. It's
Okay.
only going to do that on the outside of the curve, by the
Right.
way. The
Right.
inside of the curve is going to stay smaller. So now, as you've taken that 8 inches, okay, and now you've bent the part. Now that it's going to start to form an angle where we are more like 10 inches on the outside, 8 inches on the inside. So how much radius can we get when that happens? And we'll call that as far as we can bend. And
Yeah.
that radius is around 4 to 5 times the thickness of the plank.
Wow.
If it's a 1 inch thick plank, that means we can bend that to a 4 to 5 inch radius.
4 inch
And I
radius.
will at times go further to say a 3 inch radius, which is kind of crazy, but it's because I can pick and choose the wood I'm working with in my shop, and I might have one of those planks that had extra compression in one end and not enough in the other end. So that one end, I could get a 3-to-1 ratio. But generally, what I say is something coming out of our shop and shipping to one of our customers will do a 5-to-1, and so that's a 1 inch plank making a 5 inch radius. If you want a tighter radius, you can take a half an inch to a 2.5 inch radius.
Hmm.
If you cut the compressed wood up like it's a leather shoelace, it will bend like a leather shoelace. You can actually tie your shoes with it, and that has been done. You start to run into little problems. If you get grain run out, you'll get a split and that kind of thing. But if you had perfectly straight grained wood, at say an eighth of an inch by an eighth of an inch and a piece maybe 3 feet long, you tie your shoe with it.
That's
If you
cool.
have a piece that's around a half inch thick, say half inch by 4 feet long, I bend those into knots in my bare hands. And I do my kind of trademark knot bend, which is sort of a demo bend. And if people want to see the uh, the knot bend being displayed at a trade show, there's one. People make me do this all day long at trade shows. Everybody comes and do the knot. It's like I feel like I'm making balloon animals at some zoo.
Maybe you
Um,
should make balloon animals. Can you make a dog?
I
Why not?
think I've sure I've made Mickey Mouse.
All right,
Um,
great.
so yeah, I can. I sure, but you do that. I mean, I'm kind of busy with the parts I make. Somebody else can do dogs in front of zoos.
Right.
People
So,
always ask if I can make this or that, and the answer is yes, but I don't want to. So
sure. So
I have my
you had hinted on something a little bit earlier, and one of the questions I wanted to talk to you about was just the sourcing of this material. What kind of, I mean, certainly you've got to look for nice straight grain stuff. You've got to have that. I'm assuming you're not riving everything. You know, like a typical Windsor maker steam bender, we're going to rive our material in order to get that nice straight grain stock, and then we're going to shave it to get that single growth ring along the face. you must not be doing that side of things, or maybe you are. How is the stock prepared before it even goes into your compression autoclave or apparatus or whatever it is you're using?
So, well, I'll answer that autoclave first,
Okay.
because there's a difference between an autoclave and a steam box. And the only difference is that autoclave is steam under pressure. And
Okay.
so, yes, we use autoclaves rather than steam boxes, but generically we just call them steam boxes. But we use pressure. And what the pressure does is it drives up the temperature more. So instead
Sure.
of steaming at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, we're steaming probably pushing 240 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're using that pressurized steam to really plasticize the lumber.
Sure.
So, and I guess another thing along that line is most steam benders are aware of a rule of thumb where you steam for about an hour per inch of thickness.
Right.
And for me, it's more like 10 hours. We
Wow.
have to totally plasticize those planks so that it can get that maximum compression. And then because steam benders don't normally need a maximum of anything. Windsor chairback is
Right.
not a challenging piece for me.
Sure.
It doesn't use the 1 to 5 rule that I have. Say a 1 inch thick Windsor chairback is going to about a 12-inch radius, and I could
Yeah.
take it to a 4-inch radius. So I'm not using the lumber as far to its full potential in that case, which is fine. It doesn't have to be always taken to the full potential. But my point is, steam benders don't usually have to do that. So they're not always going for the maximum, but generally when I make a plank, I'm compressing it as much as it can be compressed, unless I know it's for something that doesn't need that. And there's reasons to not compress it all the way too. Uh, so let's see. I got distracted on
No, that was part of my
steam
next question, so
baths.
that's good to hear.
Okay.
And while you're on the autoclave, the autoclave is also doing the compression, correct? So once you've plasticized it, then I just assume you're pressing in the same apparatus from the
No,
ends of the board.
no, not true. But I remember
Okay.
now you were asking me a question about sourcing wood. So
Yeah.
I have to use clear, straight grained lumber.
Yeah. Knots would
And
be a real problem.
any kind, it's a bigger problem than you'd even think. A
Hmm.
pin knot can blow up into a 1 inch hole
Yeah.
because of the pressure that we're putting it under. Even very small defects can enlarge and cause a big fold in the plank that now all the compression gets driven into that defect. And so the rest of the plank doesn't get as much compression as I wanted it to get. And I
Right.
probably can't use it for what I intended to. So it's not unusual to have, say, a hidden defect in a plank and the compression gets driven into that, and I might lose the load. So I'm just making expensive firewood at that point. It kind of the worst thing that can happen is I want to compress something, but I don't have the most pristine lumber I'd hope for. Let's say it's walnut, and walnut is expensive, and I bought maybe a grade down in walnut to get it for $8.50 a foot instead of $14, something like
Right.
that. And so now we're starting to suffer higher yield losses doing that. And we're picking and choosing, we're sawing off stuff and downgrading it for other projects and we're using the best wood we can find, essentially. And if
Right.
we don't, we risk yield loss. Even use, excuse me, even using the best wood we can find, we don't always get perfect compression. Of course,
Sure.
the wood that we send to our customers always has perfect compression. So that means we get less than perfect compression that we use in house, but we kind of
Right.
know what to do with it. We will have a variety of projects that we might use it for. So yeah, straight grained lumber, and it also has to be our temperate hardwoods. Those are the bending woods. Same for steam benders. North American temperate hardwoods. Forget about softwoods. Forget about anything imported, exotics. The tropical hardwoods don't have the physical properties in the cell walls
Right.
to bend like this. The softwoods don't, with very minor exceptions, but they still won't go very far. And if somebody wants to work in teak or ipe or kumaru or bubinga, this isn't the process. The only way to,
No,
and they're not good steam benders either.
no,
So
they're
you
not.
have to slice them up and laminate them. That's the only way to get a decent
And
curve out of those.
there's still a fair bit of spring back. I did an Ipe bent lamb just the other day for a kind of a convoluted compound curve stair rail for a customer out in Malibu. And I mean, no matter how thin we slice those laminates, how long you keep it in the form, what kind of glue you use, there's still just a little bit of spring back in Ipe, and we have to kind of engineer for that. It's just
You
it's not a
you
good bending wood.
you can't pay me enough to work with ePay.
Yeah, I don't blame
The
you.
other problem with ePay is the slivers are like bee stings.
Yeah,
So
no kidding.
no, it's very difficult to laminate. Now you have thin layers of wood that doesn't want to laminate. It's
Yeah,
very difficult to get a good lamination, especially if it's going outdoors. Uh, I've tried it. Just
yeah,
and I have a lot of experience with epoxies and putting stuff outdoors, and people come to me for wood bending, but the architect specified it in Nipe, and it's like, what, you should have talked to me 6 months ago, and I would have said do it in black locust. You know,
right.
so temperate hardwoods, and the best ones are going to be the ones that grow with competition, tall and straight, with trees right beside them, so they don't have limbs down low, and you don't have knots in the wood, and that lumber is in the northeast of the U.S. primarily. So we're
Right.
talking Ohio and Pennsylvania, where most of my lumber comes from. I can use hardwood lumber from anywhere in the country, but if I order a pallet or a truckload of lumber from Ohio or Pennsylvania, I'm going to get a truckload of good usable lumber. If I order it from Oregon, where white oak is common but grows along fence rows and branches down low, I'm going to get some really nice looking rustic wood that won't go
Yeah,
into my wood press.
sure.
So
Now,
yeah,
what
so
about, you're saying temperate hardwoods, but I imagine even then there's some limiters. Some of your denser, diffuse porous woods like maple and even cherry. I mean, I look at these as not very good steam bending woods to begin with, but being as you're compressing those cell walls, does it matter the species you use as long as you have clear stock?
it does matter. There, I split them up into the coarse grained and the fine grained woods.
Mm-hmm.
So those were fine grained woods that you mentioned, and those would be beech, birch, maple, cherry, walnut, and I would consider most of those to be good bending woods, but not great.
Right.
Great bending woods are the coarse grained woods: ash, elm, oaks, um, sassafras, hackberry are wonderful bending woods that nobody realizes. But I do, because I try everything. I've tried Kentucky coffee tree, catalpa, Osage
Mm-hmm.
orange, um, mulberry, anything I can get my hands on, dogwood.
Really, dogwood.
I don't recommend it.
I was
Uh,
gonna say that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. That's like the North American variety of Ipe almost. That
uh,
hardness and density.
it's a small tree, and it's hard to get long, straight lumber from
Yeah,
something like dogwood,
sure.
and then it's not stable drying. So you get twisting and checks. Madrona, a lot of Madrona grows near me. Beautiful fine grained lumber, but you look at the tree and it's a mess. The trunk is very curved and branched, and it also twists and chucks as it dries. So the best woods are the ones that are relatively easy to dry and are fairly stable, and those are the ones that you would think they would be: ash, elm, oak,
Sure.
primarily.
That makes sense. So we have this. We've sourced the wood. We brought in, beautiful straight grain stuff. You are dimensioning to some respect. I imagine you've got kind of standard blanks and stock sizes that you're trying to maintain, but you also may be working off of a specification. So you're doing shaping ahead of compression, but I assume you can continue to shape the wood after compression, right? Before. I mean,
Yes.
certainly after bending and setting and curing and drying, you could, grab a spoke shave and do whatever from there. But I'm thinking back to the Windsor analogy, where if I'm making continuous arm Windsor, I'm going to slightly shape the bow, and then I'm going to flatten out the arms, and I'm going to do that shaping ahead of time, and then I'm going to put it into my bending form. Can we shape a compressed wood before bend?
Yes. And my constraints for bending, or for the size of the plank I use, it's the chamber dimension. And I already told
Okay,
you
sure.
it's 10 feet long, but it's roughly 6 inches wide and 4 inches
Okay,
tall. I have
sure.
variable chamber dimensions, but let's just say it's 4 by 6 by 10 feet. And so within the 4 by 6, I can put anything I want. I can put in 6 1 by 4s vertically. I can put in two by 6s horizontally. Generally, I'm doing 6 inch wide planks, and I'm doing typically 3 5/4 planks or 2 7/4 planks at a time. That tends to
Okay.
be my best fit. So I'm going for a height of about 3.5 to 3 3/4 inches with, and it's planed for sides before it goes in. When it comes out, the wood is still pretty hot and wet, and it needs to be cooled overnight in a straightening rack and dried. I'm sorry, not dried, cooled and stabilized.
Right.
Then we wrap it in plastic and we just keep it at that moisture content, forever, until we want to use it. And forever can be months to years, depending on how well it's stored. You take that plank out of the plastic, saw off the piece you want to use, preferably on a bandsaw, and then put the rest back and save it for the next time. And then from that piece you've taken off, you do your shaping prior to bending. If you need to put a dado in it, you can do that.
Okay.
If you're doing a spline of something in a chair seat, for instance, and a taper, anything like that, do it first. It's easier to do it on a straight piece of wood than on a curve. But you can also just bend it and then run a router around it to get the shapes you want, round overs or tapers. The woodworking doesn't change very much.
Okay.
It's just source material has changed quite a bit. And you no longer have to think about how much time you have to make the bend. You take a piece of wood out of the steam box, and hopefully you have a decent backing strap, and you have ends to contain the length of the plank. And you put it on, and in a minute or two, you've made your bend. And by the way, it's very difficult to shape that piece beforehand, that steam bent piece, because it wants to be fairly rectangular to survive the bend with a backing strap. So there's less that you can do in steam bending. In compressed wood, you can do all your shaping and then
That's a
bend
good
it.
point. The only time I've ever done that, especially when we talk about the numbers you're throwing out, it's a very, very tame bend, 12-inch, 15-inch radius type things.
Well,
And I've gone to the step of riving and shaving and, getting a
yeah,
consistent growth ring. So I've got a little bit more leeway there, but yeah,
and
it's,
also you
it's,
probably didn't use kiln dried wood, right?
no, 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 straight from the log.
Okay, which I didn't remember. I didn't mention before, but once wood's been kiln dried, it's too late for my process, because we talked about water a little bit. You can't put bound water back into a plank. Soak it all you
Right.
want. You're putting in free water, and we need the bound water in there to get a good compression. So your comment made me think of a dowel. Okay, so now let's say you have a dowel that you steam and bend, or a piece of compressed wood that you bend cold, and they're both dowels. The problem with steaming that dowel and bending it is you can't adequately back it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't protect the outside except for one tiny little area on the dowel. You can't properly keep the grain from splitting out on the backside. And I'm only talking about more extreme bends, because gentle bend, it won't make any difference.
Right.
But for compressed wood, it doesn't matter, because we're not trying to compress to the inside. we're letting it stretch out. So a little bit more freedom, maybe a lot more freedom of shaping and such with the compressed wood before you bend it. And then, of course, after you get it, you don't have any time limits to get it on the form like you do with steam. Steam gives you a minute or 2 or 5 minutes to get things right, and then you've got to quit, call it
Well,
good.
what is your open time, if we can even use that term? I mean, obviously it does dry. That's how it sets. But I mean,
Yes.
how much time do you have to play with when you take it out of the plastic? The clock is ticking.
So the question then is, how long does it take a piece of wood to dry from 20% moisture to, say, 7?
I see. Right. It's the exact same.
Long,
Right.
a
Yeah.
long time. Wood
Yeah.
dries very slowly. So you
And
can
not at
bend
all
that.
where I live. It never gets to 7% on the East Coast. It stops at about
Well,
12 in my shop.
and I'm in Washington State, and
Right.
outdoors in the winter I'm going to be 12 to 14%, and outdoors in the summer I might be 8 or 9% because we actually have dry summers.
Hmm.
But if your shop doesn't have HVAC, then yeah, you can't get drier than 12. If you do have heating and air conditioning in your shop or where the wood is going to go, it's going to go to 6 or 7 or 8%.
Right.
So even if it only goes to 12% when you're working on it, you send it to a customer's place, it's still going to dry. It goes to Southern California, it's going to 5%. And this
Right.
is something I have to deal with all the time is in my climate where things are a little bit damp. I make a lot of parts that go to Southern California, and they have to be really dry, drier than, you know, I have a room in my shop I call LA, because one time I was at a customer's plant and I'm in their veneer room and I look at the humidity meter and it said 5%. And I went,
Hmm.
is that relative humidity? Oh yeah. It's like, wow, it's like 5% relative humidity. So the wood, you're getting wood that wants to be 3-4% to equilibrate with that.
Yeah.
That was it was about 100 degrees in there though, so it was a pretty unusual environment. They were using heat to in their presses. So so drying takes as long as it takes. You want it to go faster, you need heat and airflow.
Hmm. Sure.
So
Yeah.
you put a pallet of lumber outside to dry. Don't go back and see it for a year or two. Okay, now you want to dry. You want to make a part for a customer. You don't want to put it outside and leave it for a year or two. So you bring it inside and you put it in a heated environment. And we make all kinds of small little kilns, which are just styrofoam panels, say 2-inch thick, 4 foot by 8 foot styrofoam panels that are just assembled together, the heater and fan inside. We get the temperature up to 110, 120 Fahrenheit, and depending on the thickness of the wood, our parts will stay in there from a day or two to maybe a week or two, depending on how thick the part is and how contained the part is in the formwork. So we have
Right.
clamping balls and formwork, and it's just completely covered. It's going to take a little bit more time for that to dry out. But I would say a 1x6 at that kind of a low temperature homemade kiln might take a week to dry, and a half-inch part a few days.
Sure.
So
No,
you want to you want to dry faster. You need more heat, more airflow.
more airflow.
Uh, if it happens to be a small piece, like you showed my knot design, you can put that
Hmm.
in the microwave, dry it in a few
Oh yeah.
minutes.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
RF kilns. It's the microwave.
well,
Yeah.
exactly. The microwave will dry. I have customers that buy compressed wood, say to make jewelry, and you can just take some small curved part, rubber band it to a form, put it in the microwave, and dry it. Not full heat. Use around 30% power, and give it around 30 seconds. Check it, and then just keep going. When it gets almost too hot to touch, it's probably done. A little bit hard to get a moisture meter on a small part like that, and most of my customers wouldn't have a moisture meter to check it, but
Right.
I do, and I found that the parts are getting really stiff about the time they're getting blazing hot, and the next thing that happens is they start on fire.
Okay.
So,
If it catches on fire, stop. That's generally a. I don't think we have to
well,
write that down. That one's pretty obvious, I think.
when I was learning to use a microwave to dry wood, there was a time when I grabbed the microwave and unplugged it and ran outside with it, and then opened the door out in the driveway. And I was like, okay, this is that was too far.
Hopefully, just one time. Hopefully, that's a lesson you only have to learn once.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was only once. You know,
Of course.
you try.
Well,
Where it really happens though is in your form work, and sometimes the form work's not dry. So if you put a piece of wood on a piece of form and you put them in, and it's taking a long time, it's because you're drying the form work too.
yeah,
And
sure.
in a microwave, it's like the baked potato. You put in a little baked potato, it's 2 minutes. You put in a big one, it's 10 minutes. But the microwave also is sending its power to the center. And so
Right.
if you have a big form that was kind of wet, it's going to the center of that form and eventually dry out the center and start drying the rest. But that center might turn to charcoal. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't break out into flames. It turns into charcoal in the middle of the piece of wood. And then you'll start to notice smoke. Of course, you give it a little bit of oxygen when you open the door, and then you might get some flames.
Right. Backdraft.
It's all fun and games in a wood shop.
Sure. Well, I think, I mean, there's so many possibilities. And a little bit earlier on the video, I was just had the gallery running and all kinds of sculptural type things. But where you came to my attention was through you brought up snare drums before. I've spoken quite a bit on this show about tonality. I've actually guest hosted on a couple of Lutherie podcasts to talk about the wood, science of tonality. So there are drums being made right now. You have customers that buy your wood that make drums out of it. Is there any kind of technical property change here? I mean, it's working the same. The drying is the same. What happens to the tonality of this when it's bent?
Well,
I mean,
we
you're
actually make the
choosing the
drums
density, I would think.
for the customer. Very few people are buying our wood and making drums because it's just not many who do that. Would you like to see one? There's
Sure.
one
Yeah.
right behind me. All right. So on this drum shell, the wall is extremely thick. It's about one. It's over an inch thick. By the way, let's show you the other side. This happens to be a three-piece glue up. The snare bed is vibrating from my voice. It's a very active instrument, but what we're doing is to make that shell, we are compressing we are bending very thick wood. So anybody who knows a drum shell knows a snare drum is probably, if it's made from wood, about a quarter of an inch thick, because that's what you can steam bend, maybe 5/16 tops. We're bending close to an inch and a quarter thick to get that 6-inch inside radius, 12-inch diameter. So we have 12-inch inside diameter, 14 outside. And by the way, that 1 inch going to that size is roughly using up all of our 8 to 10-inch stretch. So
Yeah.
if you draw a circle that is the size of a snare drum and an inch thick, and then you go and you measure your 8-inch lines or 10-inch lines, you'll find that they're all 8 inches on the inside and all 10 inches on the outside. So we are pushing that plank of wood to its maximum on that
Yeah.
snare
Wow.
drum bend. Now, tonality. The wood is more dense,
Hmm.
so that could do something for it.
Yeah.
But the main
Gives it a
thing is
brighter.
that
Well, you just said it's a very active instrument. It'd be a much brighter, more reactive to your to surrounding vibration.
it's going to have a lot to do with what species it's made out of too. So
Sure.
but even more so on the thickness. So my customer, when I first started making this drum workshop, came to me and said, "Can you make this in 1x6 to a 12-inch inside diameter. They had seen a picture that I had done of something similar to that on my website, and so a drum builder saw that, and so they asked me that question. I said, I think so. I'll try. And I made 2 of them, and I sent them down. And the next week, 4 of them flew up on their corporate airplane and landed on the airfield next to where I live, and we spent a day talking about what we're going to do. And that was 20 years ago, and I've made thousands of
That's
drum shells for
fantastic.
them since. So it turns out that their holy grail for a drum shell was to make a thick solid wood drum shell, because going thick increases the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not exactly talking about tonality, but but the pitch is going up, and
Acoustics.
they couldn't do it any other way. You can make a 1-inch thick drum shell by laminating plies together, but it will sound terrible because
Yeah.
it has so much glue in it, and glue is dead. So the acoustics and glue is terrible. So they couldn't make. You can also do it as a stave shell.
Mm-hmm.
You'd hollow out a log, but the grain direction is poor for stability. It's going to probably break at some point. So there is no good way to, other than maybe a stave shell, which has a certain kind of a look to it, sort of an arts and crafts look that not anybody really was after. So this thick, solid maple shell, an inch thick, was their holy grail, because there's no other way to make it. You couldn't steam bend it, you couldn't laminate it, you couldn't stave it. There's just no other way. So it became its own unique instrument. And of course, it went right to the top of their price point. You can buy a perfectly good snare drum shell for what, $300-400, and these are probably pushing $2,000. So it's a unique instrument that goes to people who want a high pitch, and it turns out can get very high volume out of these shells. I'm not a drummer. I have a drummer who works for me, and he loves them, and he likes to tell me what they're good for, and it's just they become people's favorite drum shells. But I guess the point behind this is, when I make something from compressed wood, or somebody asks me to make something, say it's a musical instrument, I ask them, how does it benefit that instrument to be thicker,
Yeah.
thicker solid wood? And if the answer is, well, we just thought it'd be easier to build, it's probably not a good enough answer to use it. Compressed wood is going to be a lot more expensive than any other kind of wood because of the engineering, the yield losses, and that sort of thing. And if there's another way to make it, do that. We're not going to use our compressed wood and do a guitar side that's 85 thou thick, because you don't need my wood to do that. Now, if
Yeah.
there's a
Good
reason
point.
to make a guitar side a half an inch thick, then my wood is for that.
It's a
And
heavy guitar.
I could describe a way where that makes sense. And there are a number of ways where that does make sense. And you get somebody who's working in these fields, and they go, well, let's see, if I made a half-inch thick guitar side, what if I could just hollow out the body, and now
Mm-hmm.
I have the thick edges already. I don't have to put a lining on it. Does that
Yeah.
make it easier to build? Okay, so you make a side, hollow out the body to whatever thickness you want. Your linings are built in. Now put a top and bottom on. And maybe that made it a lot easier to build. And we've done that.
Yeah.
It works really well. Hasn't hit any kind of a commercial volume level, because I keep having these conversations with people like, why do you want compressed wood? It needs to be a benefit for it to be thick and solid. And if we don't find that benefit, the project doesn't go anywhere.
It's actually that one statement, I think, teaches me more than anything we've talked about up until now, because I've been looking at this as a different, entity altogether. It's still wood. Yes, we have caused that, bellow shape in the cell wall, but as that dries, and it stiffens and it holds whatever shape, it's still wood. It works the same. It dries the same. And you're right. Like if I'm doing something with a really thin piece, I can bend it with whatever methods I'm using now. What you are allowing us to do is create. I mean, certainly the more extreme bends, you're allowing that, but you're allowing to bend really thick materials. I have a chair maker that bends, chair backs, and they use 3/4 inch thick stuff for a typical chair back, but you're talking, a 20-inch radius, super wide radius. And they just have a press, and it comes down and presses it into place, and they just use heat more than anything else. That's easy, because it's such a narrow bend. What you're allowing us to do is bend a snare drum in 1 inch thick. And that, you're right. It's really no different. I've been trying to think if this is like some major different technical property, and it is still wood. It's, you're not adding chemicals, you're not adding any kind of resins or anything like that. You're just steaming it and compressing it. That's fascinating. It's it kind of blows my mind. You've done
let me add
a lot to it, but wow.
Let me add a new element to what it means in this kind of a scenario, because a snare drum shell is a simple curve. It's a circle.
Right.
A Windsor chair back is a very simple curve. It's just a horseshoe shape. But and steam bending prefers shapes like that because that's how backing straps work.
Yeah.
And if you've done any steam bending, you'll know that if you try and make an S curve in steam bending, you have to get that inflection point, put your backing strap on the other side too. So you're always backing the outside of the curve. Okay, make it even harder and bend it in 3 dimensions. And now you need to back it a different way. It gets very complex in steam bending to back 3D bends. And add one more element, and that would be a twist, which compressed wood is really good at. You can't really back a twist in any way. So compressed wood can do S curves, face bends, edge bends, twists. And we can, if you think about taking it and tying a knot with it, you have every bend in there. You have the S curve. You have the face bend, edge bend, twist. It's all in there. And there's no way to back that kind of thing with steam bending. So some people who don't know wood bending will look at that and go, "Oh, I didn't know you could do this." It's like, you can't. It's, well, you did it. It's like, this is the only place you're going to see that. So it is really, really unique to be able to bend in these very, very free ways. So it's terrific for experimenting and doing, say, prototype work on the bench.
Yeah.
I really recommend that people take strips of it and just start experimenting. And what usually happens is they have a sleepless night thinking about all the things they can now do. Right. And this happens over and over again, that people start thinking about the new things they can do that they couldn't do before. That's what compressed wood is for. I want it to be for making things out of wood that you couldn't otherwise make out of wood. And I will look to wrought iron, steel structures, plastics, fabrics, that kind of thing to inspire me to do new things with wood. And I rarely look back and go, what can we copy? Right. We copied a chair, but they were pretty good at doing that in the 1850s.
Right.
We're not very good at doing that in the 2020s. So yeah, we could make a Thone chair with compressed wood, but we're still not using compressed wood to any kind of its peak ability. So
let's talk about making crazy things. You started making bicycles, and I know that this was something you wanted to talk about as well. I am a cyclist. I've been racing since I was in high school. Took a little break for a while to do some adult things like college and corporate jobs and stuff, and got back into triathlon about 10 years ago. I have 7 bikes, and I'm a woodworker. This is a Venn diagram for me. This is amazing. For those watching video, we're looking at a bike frame. You actually sell a bike frame whole build package.
So you were basically my target market for my do-it-yourself bike frame. And it's something that I've been sort of launching for 2 years, but I got really serious about launching the kit in the last 2 months, and I've did two trade shows. I did the Made trade show, which is for independent frame builders in Portland in August, and then I went to the Wooden Boat Show in Port Townsend because people there like anything in wood, and introduced the concept of people building their own bikes. And the Wooden Boat Show is pretty good for that because there's 10,000 people, and I think they all came to the booth and took a business card and talked to me about all these things. So this is a super bike in terms of how it rides, how it performs, what it costs. One of these bikes built, I charge, if I build somebody a frame, I charge usually $7,500 for that frame. And by the time it's built, it's a $10,000 to $15,000 bike. Mm-hmm. So we're getting up into the super bike category. It could be more if we start getting really artistic with carving and inlay in the bike, which is just another level. But it takes a lot. It's labor intensive. It's expensive. The market's relatively small. I can only make so many of them. And I started to think in terms of leverage, volume, what I want to do, and I want to mentor people to make their own. So this concept allows me to do that. And by the way, it's a perfect place for compressed wood. And that needs a little explanation because you can see the frame is curvy, but you can't necessarily see where the compressed wood is in this. But the compressed wood in this bike frame is the secret sauce. And I am using thick, solid wood bends in the structural areas of the bike where it helps it the most. Now, I should say that these are hollow wood tubes. They are hollow tubes made of wood. And the hollow is created kind of like a box beam. So we have, say, look at the top tube or any of the tubes on here. You have a top, a bottom, and two sides. Inside, you have air. There's no carbon fiber. There's no aluminum, except in a few cases where we're connecting to other components of the bike. And that box beam is extremely stiff, but wood absorbs vibration too. So that's a real benefit because you get a lot of vibration coming up through the bike and into the rider, into the joints. And certain materials transmit that vibration a lot, like aluminum, but most bikes transmit quite a bit of vibration to the rider. Wood dampens it. And we use multiple species of wood, and wood will attenuate the vibration differently depending on the species. So if one species didn't get it, the next species might get it. So what we end up with is an extremely comfortable ride. People who do long rides, bikers call them centuries. A century for a non-biker is a 100-mile ride.
Right.
And there's going to be less fatigue riding a bike like this. They're just so fantastic to ride. My wife, she asked me how my bike ride was, and I only ever now have one answer for it, and I say it was remarkable because it's just doesn't, whichever bike I've built that I get on and ride, they are just absolutely remarkable to ride. They're just so wonderful. I have testimonials on my website, and if you look in Pure Timber, if you're really diligent, you can find a way to my bikes, but it's a little bit hidden there. The bikes are more consumer product, and I put them at Renovo.bike. Renovo is my brand name for bikes. That's actually Renovo is my brand name for wooden sports equipment in modern geometry. Not just bikes, but also tennis rackets, downhill racing skis, rowing shells. But right now it's mainly bikes, and other things are being prototyped. So the compressed wood uniquely allows me to build a wooden bike frame that probably couldn't exist otherwise. I mean, there are other ways to build a wooden bike frame. They are not as good as this. They do not make as effective a wooden frame, even though there are other wooden bike makers making gorgeous and wonderful wooden bikes. I can confidently say these are the best in the world. because of the compressed wood and what the compressed wood does in the bike frames. So to get away from that,
I can look at your frame, and I've seen other wooden bikes made, and it's a lot of bent lamb or shaping. Yours is a lot closer to a carbon monocoque frame.
it is exactly.
That's what blows my mind.
Yeah. So
You're actually, the way that you can fold and bend the carbon fiber, you're doing the same thing with your compressed wood. But
and wood,
I'm so glad
wood
you brought up
is
the dampening side of things, because that's the secret sauce to me as a writer. That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Well, wood is carbon fiber. It's
Yeah,
just
true.
it's the OG carbon fiber. So I'm using nature's carbon fiber. Now, you mentioned cold bent laminations, and my seat stays and my chain stays are cold bent laminations. It's just the easiest, best way to
Hmm.
do that. But the main triangle of the frame is where I have curved parts. I'm bending those,
Yeah.
and all of those parts turn out to be in the middle of the frame, and it's actually the middle 1.25 inch. It's 1.25 inch because the seat post is 1.25 inch, and so I make everything in the middle 1.25 inch. So I have this 1.25 inch layer that is the top and bottom tubes, and then they're flattened in a wide belt sander until just before it touches the carbon fiber seat post that is embedded in there, and after that, it's decked with any kind of wood that you want to use. Here's where you can use Alaskan yellow cedar, or please not ipe, but it's, well, I mean, it would make kind of a heavy bike. The
Yeah.
heaviest I've ever gone on a bike is a white oak. That's the white oak bike right there.
Yeah.
The reason why I did that, though, is I mean, you look at white oak and go, or you lift it and go, this isn't for a bike. But these are wine barrel staves. So
Oh, okay.
uh,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
so those stripes are the red wine stain
Hmm.
in the wine barrel staves. I laminated that together to make the outside decking part. And so if somebody says they want a bike to ride to wineries for wine tasting, I'll say this is the bike you need.
That's the bike you need. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful bike. It has that's it too.
Yeah.
I just Now, to me, looking at the front of that, I see a beer bottle. Do you see
Yeah. You're
that?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I
You're.
look at that and it's like, do you see the beer bottle in there? I don't know why it's doing that, because it was wine barrel staves. But and
Fair now.
weird thing is, I put whiskey parts on these, and whiskey part company. It's just a brand name, but
Yeah.
it's just
Sure.
kind of fun to put wine barrel whiskey parts. And I have a customer in Germany I'm building two frames for, and he's going to ride them to Iraq, and he's going to tow a trailer load of seedlings from Germany to Iraq and plant them every
Wow.
kilometer. Every kilometer. So he wanted a wooden bike to pull the trailer and plant seedlings. So we're kind of going forest to bike, back
Hmm.
to forest.
Back to forest. Yeah.
And I thought, this guy's probably not a drinker. I'm pretty sure he's Iraqi, but living in Germany. And I thought, I'm not going to recommend one of these. And I started showing him what I was doing for him. And he said, well, could I get one of those whiskey bikes? It's like, okay, I wasn't going to bring that into the conversation, but if that's what you want, I'd be happy to.
Sure. Customers
So
always right.
it's just kind of fun. And I wouldn't use white oak because it's heavy and dense, except that's what whiskey barrel and wine barrel staves are made from. My point is, though, the decking, those outside, what I call the show wood layer on the
Uh
bikes,
huh.
can be anything. It
Anything
could
you want.
be something that you've reclaimed, say from a grandparent, that you've inherited a piece of furniture and now you want to take the top off that and turn it into a bike. You can take a yard tree, and this has been done twice, where people will take yard trees. Someone had American chestnut on his property, and it fell down in a storm. It was 120 years old. He knew what it was. He had somebody come in with a portable sawmill. He sawed it up into 60 slabs. And then he came to me and he said, I have American chestnut. And I went, uh huh. Yeah. He said, you know what that is, don't you? I said, yeah. I said, that's unicorn wood.
Yeah.
And he
Right.
loved it. And it was like, he knew he knew he had somebody to talk to about it. So he was in his 70s and retired corporate tech manager. He started working part time for me, sanding wood, and then now he's made his own bike frame with this American chestnut in it. And so it's the only American chestnut wood that's ever going to be made, or bike, American chestnut bike that's ever made, unless he makes more.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be done again. But those are the kinds of things that can be done. You can take something that's special and turn it into that bike. But what I really want to do with my bikes is not just mentor people like yourself on building one so that they can ride. I would like to get people started on either, say, a retirement small business or a young person starting out and making Renovos, basically under license from me. Mm-hmm. And under my marketing umbrella, but selling them anywhere in the world. I go to a trade show and it's a huge effort and there's cost involved, and I can only do so many of them. But there's people in other parts of the country, other parts of the world that can go to their own trade shows or farmers markets or art galleries and market in their own way. They may have their own art that they want to put into the bike frames, like carving and inlays. But usually the first time they're just going to follow my instructions pretty closely. So,
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just, I'm at the age where I have to start thinking about one day there will be a retirement, not soon. I'm probably going to be somebody who doesn't actually truly retire.
Yeah.
But what I might do is mentor bikes for the rest of my life. And if somebody wants to, I will go and travel and do a class. For that class, people have to pre-purchase the bike kit, but I have a bike kit that can be finished in 3 days. So it's basically two-thirds built. I do all the hard part. I do the wood bending, the alignment, the geometry, all the things that are next to impossible to accomplish. I put in the dropouts. The dropouts are CNC milled from my file. So it ends up being a class of assembly, shaping, sanding, and finishing. And then they can leave. And I'm going to do this, probably my first one will be the Wood and Boat Show next September in Port Townsend, Washington. And I'm looking for other shows. And if you or any of your listeners have any ideas about, say, bringing me in to do a class, I would be open to talking about that. I need 3 or 4 people to commit to doing a class, and then I can come and work in somebody else's workshop and mentor that build. But I also have a kit that is for people to just take home and build, and the time frame to build, say, the 3-day in a show bike is only about 20 hours. Yeah. So think about it like you buy a kayak from Chesapeake Light Craft, a kit, and you're going to assemble it and build it, and 300 hours later you have a kayak. Well, 300 hours is a long time. It probably took you all winter and most of the next summer. The bike's going to take about 20 hours, and I'll say 30 or 40 hours if somebody needs to learn, do YouTube videos on how do you sand wood, that kind of thing. So I prefer not to mentor people on learning woodworking, because woodworking I'm used to doing is pretty advanced. And I'm not a beginning woodworker mentor. I want to take this very complex thing and mentor people to make it their way, their style. And if they wanted to, in retirement or as a young person, and this really resonates with young people who they're just sick of the cube work. And we used to do cube work 15, 20 years and go, we're out, we're starting our own business. Now, 2 years, they can't take it. They want to make something with their hands. And those people I'm interested in talking to. It's like, well, we can collaborate on something. Or somebody who's a true artist and maybe wants to do an art project, but it's going to be functional art bike. And I like to collaborate with people like that to create a piece of functional art that maybe it goes into an auction that is a fundraiser, or maybe it goes into a show, into a serious exhibition. I had one in Jackson Hole, Wyoming at the Western Design Conference last month. It's just, people kept, the person who brought it was an enthusiast of Renovo bikes, but he hadn't worked on building it. So he just called me and say, here, talk to this person. They have questions. And so all weekend long, and I wasn't at Jackson Hole because I was in Port Townsend that weekend at a different show. I had sometimes 20 people in my booth talking to somebody in Jackson Hole about the same thing. And the one in Jackson Hole, it was the wine barrel stave bike. We thought, well, maybe that'll resonate with people over there. And it did.
Sure. Well, I mean, I
So,
think, gosh, I don't think it matters. The design is beautiful. And, certainly the barrel stave adds that little added element of story, but then, the sky's the limit. Your example of the
yeah,
chestnut one is a perfect example. There's so many things you can do to make this. Well, I mean, if anybody's going to get into a super bike, it's pretty much, a lifetime purchase at this point. So I think that's fantastic. And the idea of passing it on. So I guess that kind of leads me as a good way to kind of land the plane here. How do people get in touch with you if they want to start their own Renovo franchise somewhere, or they want to, buy a sample pack to tie their own knots out of wood? What's the best way? How do we get our hands on compressed wood?
well, I have an online inventory at puretimber.com. And Pure Timber is the name of my business, and it is my main website. I have an additional website for Renovo. You'll find links to it from Pure Timber, but I don't. I try and keep it separate. Pure Timber is primarily an architectural fabrication firm, and
Right.
that's my main focus is large scale architectural fabrication. I try and do big, crazy things, organic shapes in wood. And I have a project. You look at the pictures. There's lots of beautiful things that we've built over the last 20 years, and I'm just starting one now for the George Lucas Museum in Los Angeles. That's a 350,000 square foot museum. It's just unbelievable scale. I'm doing curved benches for it right now. There's other projects, but that's Pure Timber, and that's where the wood is too. If you want to see how to use it, I have a user manual called Discover Extreme Wood Bending. I would look all through that before you call me because you'll ask all the same questions and you'll go, oh, there's the answer. Then call me and we'll go even deeper. For bikes, go to Renovo.bike,
Got it.
and from there you'll see everything about wooden bikes that you need to see. But Pure Timber is, say, a 20-year project.
Yeah.
Renovo is a 5-year project. So Pure Timber is much more mature. And Renovo has become a place to put some of this compressed wood. I keep looking for these, the place where compressed wood is just absolutely just makes the product what it is.
What
And
about
that
handlebars? We're on bikes. Have you
I
tried
think
making some
I,
drop bars?
I think Shannon, you should try that.
Okay.
Okay, or somebody. So I make frames, and I keep getting
Fair
people saying,
enough.
"Oh, how about wheels? How about It's like I think you should.
Wow. I hadn't even thought
How about
about that.
fenders? Wheels, fenders. So yeah, I had a guy who worked for me back in our Great Recession. People were coming out of school who were engineers and architects and didn't have jobs, and I had a couple of them working for me. And one of them started to make drop bar handlebars and
Mhm.
also kind of mustache bars and flat bars and stuff out of compressed wood. And he made at least a dozen of them, and he thought he was going to turn it into a business. But uh, it, uh, it wasn't something that I wanted to try and do and market. It wasn't the end use of compressed wood that I had in mind. It's what he had in mind.
Yeah.
And if I use the compressed wood to make pedals, so I take off the aluminum bales on a pedal, I throw that away, and I put on a wooden bale, and it's a thick wood bale. It makes a beautiful pedal. So different things that I make wooden bike stands that are bent wood.
Hmm.
But now you get into something like a drop bar, and it's not supported except at the stem. Now you have a piece of solid wood that's not supported except in the very middle.
Yeah.
What could happen?
A lot of
So
bad things on a bump.
nothing wrong with the bump. They feel fine. I'm thinking of weather, and you've got
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying.
so
Yeah,
you've
sure.
got this shape that might want to go open there, close there, like wood breathes, right?
Sure.
So and this wood is still going to breathe a little bit, and you get one side that opens a bit and another that closes a bit. You look at it and go, it's a little off, and so I stay away from stuff like that.
Yeah. Might be kind
I
of front heavy feeling too. Might be kind of a dead feel on the front of the bike to have that much weight in your bars. Still would like to
so
play with it and try it.
Yeah, see, this is what happens. People kind of throw out an idea. What about making this out of wood? And I challenge them to think it through, and then you start to come up with all the reasons not to do it. So the hollow frames, the box beam construction, and the bent wood, and the stiff decking, it's just been a great combination
Sure.
of using this bending wood and making functional art out of it. So I used to think chairs were really hard to make. And then I started making these crazy organic chairs for some of my customers that were terribly difficult to build. I'm talking about Game of Thrones complexity, but in bent wood, not, steel and spears. And I thought, well, okay, I've done chairs. And then the bike thing came along, and I went, I wonder if that's probably harder than chairs. And it sure is. It is harder than chairs, but it took a couple of years just to get control of all the different things that were happening in geometry and alignment. So it's in control, and now it's a kit.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic, Chris. And I will echo what you said earlier. There is a lot of information on puretimber.com. There's a couple of really, really great blog posts that I was reading through. One even about your idea of, you talk about with Renovo, but the idea of getting compressed wood out there, and you've actually got a really interesting blog breaking down the investments that you've made to create compressed wood. And essentially, in many ways, you're kind of an evangelizer trying to get this product out there and get more architects aware of it so that more people can be specifying it. And I think that there's a lot of information to be had. So anybody listening to this, watching to this, however you're taking this show in, I highly encourage you to go to puretimber.com. There's some great information there. The inspiration galleries alone will blow your mind. So, Chris, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. And I hope to talk to you some more about this, Shannon, especially that bike frame you're going to build now.
You know it's going to happen.